Welcome back to Boilers in the Stands. I am your host, Joe Jackson. Alongside me, as always, is Kraig Bowers. We are here to preview Purdue's matchup at home in Mackey Arena against Ohio State. Purdue coming off a very successful West Coast road trip where they knock off Washington after a slow start. They grind out a win against Oregon. They're on, a 7-game winning streak now heading into Ohio State, a pretty important week. This cannot be a look-ahead game. Ohio State is a team that metrics love them. Record is not great. They're 2-5 in Big Ten play, but they've lost by 1 in OT against IU, 2 to Wisconsin, 2 to Oregon, 7 to MSU, and then they got blown out way earlier in December to Maryland. So a team that record isn't good, but they have been competitive for large chunks of the season. They have a 20-point win against Kentucky. Kind of an all-over-the-place team, I think, a little bit, and we'll break down everything you need to know here. So, Kraig, I'll throw it to you. This game is a Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time tip on Peacock. What are kind of your initial thoughts about Ohio State?
Well, first of all, it's going to be nice to be back in Mackey again. I know I got there whatever day it snowed. You had to stay home, so you didn't get to see a game for almost a month. And then they immediately go on a West Coast trip again, right? But now we've got 3 home games in a row coming up, which just sets up beautifully for how they've come through the conference schedule so far in January. Now they get 3 at home. I think I saw 5 out of their next 7 are at home. So really nice stretch coming up here for Purdue. But man, an Ohio State team, and you tried to convince me in the offseason, Joe. You tried to convince me not to get sucked in and buy in again, and I didn't. I didn't in the beginning. And then they knock off Texas, and they knock off Kentucky, and I got sucked back in again, Joe. Thinking that this Ohio State team was better than what they are. But you're right. For a 10-8 team, the metrics still love them. They're still ranked 34th in Ken Palm, 44th in offense, 38th in defense. The net still values them fairly high. They have them ranked 36 in the net, but they're only 2-6 in quad 1 games and only 1-2 in quad 2 games. And an Ohio State team that just can't seem to put it all together for complete games oftentimes. To pull out the bigger wins that they need to. In terms of just I don't know, major things that jump out to me with this team, it's a team that has strong players at certain positions, right? So we know who Bruce Thornton is. He's a really well-built guard that can do a lot of damage to you really fast. This team seems to go as Thornton goes. If you can lock him up, and make him inefficient, that tends to spell bad things for Ohio State. But a team that, quite frankly, puts other teams on the foul line a ton. They rank, what is it? In terms of total free throw attempts given up to opponents, they rank 337th in the country total. And a team that is not also a great rebounding team, they give up a really high percentage of offensive rebounds. So I think there's some advantages here that Purdue can exploit. This is a little bit of a revenge game for Ohio State beating Purdue last year. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I forgot about that. That was what basically got Diebler not fully, but it was a big part probably of why Diebler got the job in the first place. And they're a team, right? They have talents. They have the ability to, put these good games together. They've just also struggled at certain times randomly. Obviously, losing by 1 at home to IU is just kind of the epitome of that. I know they didn't have Devin Royal, who's been one of their best players. We'll talk about Royal. We don't know if he's going to play or not. But yeah, this is a team where, we'll get into the keys of the game. My big thing is against teams that can be super physical against Ohio State. I don't trust Ohio State, but if Ohio State can turn it into a little bit more of a finesse type game, that's where some of their skill can come through. So I think, especially TKR and first, it's going to be very important for them just to be physical straight from the jump. They're going to get to the line a bunch, knock down your free throws, rebound the ball well. Obviously, there are more keys than that, but that's the biggest thing that stands out. Ohio State is a team. Offensively, they're for the most part just going to run pick and rolls. They're going to run a bunch of ISOs. And just kind of let their guys go. And they're out of timeout. When they do run a set, it is pretty good. They oftentimes will have big slipping. And so I think defensively for Purdue, that is something they need to be very aware of is Ohio State will slip their bigs a lot. And if you're expecting a switch, you have to be on point to be able to get that switch to go. So it's a team that, right, they have talents, just haven't put the record together. This cannot be like, I've been down on Ohio State, right, all year, and that is what it is. I still recognize this cannot be a look ahead spot. You stare down Michigan on Friday. You cannot just ignore this Ohio State team, because they've shown they can compete with really good teams still, and beat really good teams. So I don't expect that to happen, especially being back in Mackey for the first time in 9 days, but it is something that I will be watching for early.
All right. And you've kind of already described the offense a little bit, and we kind of talked offline on a little bit too, that this team just seems to end up in ISO a lot. And a lot of times that's Bruce Thornton and like, hey, do something. To that point, this Ohio State team ranks 263rd in the country in terms of assists per field goal made. And that just leans in there of telling you how many times that this turns into a one-on-one game for Ohio State of just go make something happen. Defensively, this team doesn't force teams into a lot of turnovers. I guess what type of defense do you expect to see Ohio State employ against Purdue? We going to see a lot of high hedge, trapping, pressure? We going to see drop? What are we going to be looking at here?
They're a team that can mix it up a bit for sure, and especially with, we'll get into their personnel. They can play super small where they switch everything. They do have a couple of bigs, which generally is more drop coverage, but even at times a little bit they've shown hedge. I would say their base is, with their bigs, is drop coverage, and then if they go small, it's probably to switch everything. You saw against Umar Ballo, they stayed one-on-one with him for approximately 2 post-ups and kind of got cooked both times. So then they started doubling. One thing that they did, it felt pretty consistent, is they doubled with their 4-man every time. And so obviously if it's TKR in first, it's a little different, but I would expect the double to come off of first. Maybe you could get some little high-low things going there. They are a team that, they don't force like an insane amount of threes, but it's definitely a defense predicated a little bit more on like helping in gaps. So what that means, like if Braden Smith's driving, just has to be aware, probably going to get 1 or 2 defenders trying to kind of dig in, swipe at the ball. But that's kind of what they've been, is drop, some switching, and then from there, just a little bit of help on drives. And I would expect them to double team the post, especially if like TKR gets in foul trouble quick.
Okay. Let's jump into some of the players real quick, unless you have anything else major. Just, I guess, to update everybody's watching, because you just watched us yesterday. And we talked about how Purdue's KenPom numbers on defense had jumped them up to a top 20 team. They actually got jumped last night late. So they're 21st in defense on KenPom and up to 8th in offense on KenPom, 10th overall, also 10th overall in the net right now. So through this 7-game stretch, we've definitely see Purdue climb up in the metrics all the way around. But looking at this Ohio State team from a player personnel standpoint, I think obviously everything has to start with Bruce Thornton. Purdue fans know who he is. Like I said, kind of a well-built, shifty guy that can go create on his own at 6'2". He's averaging 17.4 points a game, 4.3 assists a game for the Ohio State team this year. You have a freshman and a shooting guard in John Mobley, who's maybe cooled off a little bit more recently, who came in and was just lighting everything on fire from 3-point, averaging 12.5 points a game. Not really much of a creator, only about 1.8 assists per game. And then in the starting lineup recently, Micah Parrish at 6'6", a kind of a wing, averaging 10.5 points a game. Also a good rebounder at about 4.5 points a game. Obviously, we know Bruce Thornton's a stud. Mobley flashed really early, maybe hasn't had quite as much success in Big Ten play. But as you look at these 3 guys in kind of the guard wing room, I guess just what are your thoughts, and maybe what does Purdue have to do to slow Thornton down?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect CJ is going to pick up Thornton to start. I think this is a team where, right, he's going to run a lot of pick and rolls. He's going to run a lot of ISOs. I would expect Purdue's defense just to try to do what they've been doing of, hey, we're going to show a lot of help. They're going to live with probably some of the jumpers, although he's obviously been very good even from mid-range, from 3. Like, he's a very tough player to guard. And so I would guess Purdue just tries to be physical and somewhat match his physicality, and just try to put some pressure on him, not let him get like completely free looks, and then show a lot of help elsewhere. he's one of those guys there's not too much more to say other than he's a bucket from literally everywhere, does a solid job facilitating. He's really the only true like facilitator on this team. And then just gotta know where he's at literally all times. Mobley is interesting because he's probably just the best shooter in the conference still, like even if he's cooled off a bit. If he crosses half court, Purdue has to know where he is at. He will shoot. Like, he is 6'1", 175 pounds. He might get picked in the NBA draft this year simply because he is such an anomaly shooting the ball. Like, dudes like him do not pop up really ever. Like, with his shooting ability, how much range he has, how quick he can get to the release. Like, you have to know where he is at all points. And Ohio State at times will do a good job running some like pin down things for him and stuff like that. He is somebody like I would expect Braden to be on him, make him put the ball on the ground. He's not been good on the interior at all. He's done okay on floaters, and that's his one counter, but three-point shooter, know where he is at. Micah Parrish, he's kind of this, 3-and-D type wing, good length defensively, has shot the ball fairly well. He's cooled off a little bit compared to the start of the year as well, but just kind of he's more than a glue guy, but he is closer to that role of just like can do a little bit of everything, can handle the ball a little bit if needed. He is somebody that I would expect. I assume Lawyer's going to be on him. I would expect Ohio State to let Parrish go at him right away and use his size to try to get downhill, where he's done a pretty good job finishing, I think, around the rim on the year. Yeah, 70% at the rim. So he's just kind of a little bit of an all-around player. Like, he's not like crazy elite, and I think you live with jumpers, but he's somebody that does a good job using his size to get downhill.
Yeah. And just kind of talking about Thornton and this Ohio State team to a degree, kind of going how Thornton goes. If you look at their two bigger wins of the year, right, Texas and Kentucky, he shoots 70% against Texas in that game. He shoots 62% against Kentucky in that game. In games where you kind of, and even if you look at like Rutgers, he shoots over 60%. If you can just force Thornton into like 50% or lower and just keep him from going nuts, you have a really good shot of beating this Ohio State team. I am probably more excited to watch the matchup of Cox on Thornton and Jakari when Jakari's in the game against Thornton, or whether that's Colvin at times against Thornton. That's probably what I'm most excited to watch because I thought he damaged us last year. And I just feel like we have a different set of personnel to deal with him this year. And I'm really excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, it should be a fun matchup. And like you said, he's a guy that can just get cooking, and it'll be, I mean, at this point, it feels like every single game because the Big Ten is so much more guard loaded than bigs this year. I know I've made a couple tweets. It's been talked about a little bit, but like the guards are absolutely dominating the Big Ten. It feels like every game it's like, oh wow, CJ has another tough matchup, but he does. And then also like you said, Colvin and Jakari when they rotate in as well.
Yeah, and there was one point in time in this season, I was probably short-siding Wolf and his running mate Golden at Michigan, but like there was a time I was like, man, this like first team All Big Ten might be just 5-point guards in the Big Ten for a while. I don't think that's the case anymore because some of the really top end point guards individually aren't necessarily on great teams, and that tends to matter. But nonetheless, talking kind of more about Ohio State's bigs in terms of the starters right now. Don't know if Devin Royal is going to start or not, but 6'6", listed as a power forward primarily, 13.8 points per game, 7.4 rebounds a game, 1.4 assists per game. A guy that I think just brings a lot of versatility in terms of what he can do offensively. You'll see him take people off the bounce. You'll see him post up. Big body for 6'6", like kind of, to me, even like a bigger body than Mason Gillis, but like trying to put frame of reference to Purdue player for Purdue fans there. And then primarily starting at center for Ohio State this year has been Sean Stewart, the transfer from Duke, at 6'9", averaging 6.1 points a game, 6.2 rebounds a game. We've already kind of hinted at this a little bit, but Ohio State doesn't have, I guess, just studs at the 5 spot, right? And I don't know that a ton of Big Ten teams do this year, but there's been some games where they've gotten punished in the post and punished on the boards, and certainly that feels like it could be the case for Purdue in this matchup. But I guess just as you look at Royal and as you look at Stewart, what are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, I mean, Royal is the guy offensively. Like, he's kind of second fiddle to Bruce Thornton at this point. He is a guy that they will let post up. When I talked about those slips, he's often one of those guys that does that a lot, where you kind of slip him into space, let him kind of go from there. He is somebody that a lot of times they'll just throw the ball to at the elbow and say, hey, go to work. Now, I would, ooh, I would, I don't know if I would guess. I was going to say I would guess TKR's on him, but like, it might be first. First might have Royal, and just to throw the length on him if Royal plays, obviously,
Yeah.
and just throw the length on him, and then Sean Stewart, he's been fine in his role. Like, he is one of the only rim protectors Ohio State has. He's been solid in that role. He's been a very good rebounder, like really good rebounder. He is somebody that they have to work on the glass, but really he's not much of a threat outside of 5 feet offensively. He's 73% at the rim, and then he is like 35% outside of shots at the rim. So somebody that's not going to post up, very athletic, and will be able to roll, but that's going to be his primary kind of offensive purpose, is rolls, work hard on the glass, get some putbacks, dunk the ball, things like that, protect the rim. And then Royal's the one that's more of just like the actual score. Hey, we're going to run stuff for you. Royal, both of them. And honestly, both of them, Bradshaw, who we'll talk about in a second, the backup big, they all can get in foul trouble quick. And so that is something to monitor too.
Yeah, and I guess to that point, Stewart and Bradshaw, which we will talk about in a minute, both averaging 0.8 blocks per game. Mahaffey actually leads his team in blocks at 1.1 point blocks a game, which we'll talk about him as well. Royal, not a 3-point threat.
Nope.
He'll take him 1.7 a game, but he's only shooting 21% on the year. I'm kind of like you. I kind of feel like the matchup is first on him, but we've also seen some times where we're like, man, Purdue probably wants first on him, but they actually start with TKR and bring first as help then once they like kind of go into their moves. So it'll be interesting to see how they decide to match up in that. Really, probably just 3 bench players we need to talk about. If you really think we need to talk about somebody else, we will. But you've got Quest Glover. We should say too with Thornton's basically like Braden Smith when it comes to that point guard role in bigger games anyway, in terms of how many minutes he plays at that point guard position. He's going to be there in this Purdue game. You can probably figure to see him 36 to 37 minutes in this game, right? So the backup's more going to come at the other spots. Quest Glover is a 5'11" guard, averaging 6.1 points a game. His 3-point percentage, if I remember right, was one of the 50%, but not on high volume, right? Only 1.6 attempts per game. Evan Mahaffey, 6'6". We should be familiar with him too. He's been around a while in the Big Ten. 4.7 points, 3.5 rebounds. Pretty active in terms of a shot blocker for a guy that's only 6'6". I kind of, even though is he really 6'6"? Like when I saw that, he feels bigger than that to me for some reason, but maybe that's because he does affect shots so much. And then Aaron Bradshaw, the center from Kentucky that transfers over at 7 feet. He was with the program early when Ohio State was kind of rolling early on, and then left the program for a little bit. Had to step away from the program for a little bit and then came back. Averaging 7.2 points a game on the year and 3.3 rebounds. In terms of size and length, he's obviously their biggest option from that standpoint. So it will be interesting to see if they, watch that Oregon tape and they're like, okay, so Trey can struggle with size and see if maybe I wonder if Bradshaw maybe gets a little bit more run on TKR.
Yeah, so we'll start with Quest Glover. He's a pretty shifty point guard. Transferred from Samford, didn't play last year. So he's old and he's been around for a bit. Pretty crafty with the ball, but he is somebody that is going to want to get to the mid range. He has not been good anywhere. He hasn't been good inside of 15 feet. Outside of 15 feet, he's been solid, but inside, not good. He is only 6 foot, but pretty explosive with the ball. I think, and just he's definitely more of a scorer. He's a spark plug off the bench. Like, he can be a guy that can come in, and in random games can go get you 12 to 15 off the bench. Now he's only done it a couple times, but that is what you have to worry about when he's in the game. Evan Mahaffey, he is truly their utility guy. He's not a shooter at all, which is a theme for really every single one of their bigs. The only 3 shooters on this team are Thornton, Mobley, and Parrish. Glover can knock one down. Those are the only 3 on high volume. Glover and Colin White can knock threes down, but don't do it on super high volume. Mahaffey, utility guy. He's done it throughout his whole career. He played center at one point for Penn State. He also played point guard at one point for Penn State, backing up Jalen Pickett. Like, he can handle the ball some. He can kind of switch 1 through 5 defensively. He's not a shooter whatsoever, but he's a guy that can cut pretty well, finish around the rim, finish in the paint. So the guy that's willing to do a lot of the dirty work, definitely their best defender as well. And there's a scenario where he's on Braden Smith at some point. There's a scenario where he could even be switched on to TKR, just kind of who he is. And then Bradshaw, like you said, 7'1", only 215 pounds. He's like, his build is if you like took Caleb first and just like stretched him out a bit. Like, that's kind of what Aaron Bradshaw's build is to me. Where he's a little, he's really wiry, but obviously 7'1", good length. He's somebody that around the rim, he's been awesome. Whereas I just had the numbers. Yeah. 82% around the rim, but he's somebody that's just willing to take jumpers. And if you're Purdue, you let him take jumpers all day, like the entire time. He's 8 for 37 in his career, which I'm sure means he'll go like 4 or 5 and pull the great Osibor thing. But he'll even take mid-range jumpers. Like, if you can get him to take jumpers, you're doing good. For his size, he isn't great on the boards. He's just okay. Solid rim protector, definitely he's probably the best or second best, just given his size, but not super physical. And so I am curious because he can put length on TKR, but I do think TKR can kind of body him a bit if they get to it. And then I'm going to just briefly mention a couple guys. Aaron Parks and Ivan Nagovin, they're their other 2 centers. I wouldn't be shocked to see them get some run just because of foul trouble. They're both more or less the same thing. Good rebounder, good finisher around the rim, physical. Nagovin's played more minutes the last 2 games. He's shown, hey, he can knock down a jumper too. I don't know if he gets big minutes in this one, but he's also really, really stiff. And so if you can get him to switch out, like if he's in the game, Braden Smith is going to run pick and roll with him every single time because I don't think he moves that well. Colin White's played a few minutes lately. He's kind of a potential 3-and-D type player down the road. Just hasn't gotten a ton of minutes.
Yeah. Mahaffey's one of those guys to me. Like, I remember his freshman year, I thought, man, this guy's going to be really good when he puts it all together. And he just never has really seemed to make that next jump, I guess. But you're like, just because of his skill set and the fact that he can do so many different things well, other than, I guess, shoot consistently on high volume from outside. But yeah. So as we kind of transition then and look at kind of like maybe what can Purdue do to attack this team, I'll turn it over to you in a second. But offensively, the first thing when I saw the free throw attempts per field goal attempts that they give up to teams in a game and where they rank in terms of total free throw attempts that they give up to teams in a game. So on those 2 metrics, they rank 303rd and 337th. They're 300 and tell me again, Joe, how many total teams? 360 something. There we go. 364. So they're really bad in terms of putting people on the foul line. And for anybody who was watching, some of the comments during the Oregon game, I saw some fans or on Twitter, whatever you want to say, like, why do we keep force feeding TKR? Why do we keep force feeding him? Like, he's not hitting right now. This is going to be one of those games to me because Matt Painter's looking at the film and he's looking at the numbers and he's saying, all right, we can get to the foul line really quick in this game. And the easiest way to do that is force feed the post for a little while. But outside of that, Joe, I guess, what do you see in terms of Purdue's ability to attack this defense?
I do think it's going to be a pretty big TKR game again. You just look at how teams have, so they've played 5 Big Ten games, since the start of 2025. In those 5, Simone Sapala for MSU, the 7-foot Longwood transfer, put up 15 points on them. Minnesota, Parker Fox put up 21 on them. Oregon, Biddle put up 21 on them. Wisconsin, I think Crowell only had 14 on 5 of 7 shooting from 2. And then Indiana, Umar Ballo had 21. pretty common theme that like bigs are getting points against Ohio State. So I do think that's going to be a primary thing. I would expect Ohio State to double, which means Purdue's got to knock down shots, but they're back in, the friendly confines of Mackey Arena where they have shown more that they're very capable of knocking down threes, especially at home. But then beyond that, right, I think we know at this point it's going to be a lot of Brainsmith pick and roll, but I do think this is a defense that he can attack where if they play drop, those mid-range shots are going to be there. I do think, you can get TKR on the short roll. I don't like Bradshaw is the one interesting guy just with his length, but I do think in general he can kind of body their bigs. Maybe if Nagovin comes in, he's 7'1", 250, but like I said, he doesn't play too much. I expect it to be a heavy dose of TKR. You're gonna get obviously a good chunk of Brainsmith pick and rolls, and then you're gonna get some open threes just with how Ohio State plays defensively and with being it and helping stuff like that a lot.
Yeah. I also think this has a chance to be a big Caleb first game, similar to a couple of games ago, because I do think just with the fact that they don't rebound at the highest level, even though they've got some, I guess, some size, not a ton, but in terms of at least a 7'1" guy that they will run sometimes, I think there's a chance for him to clean up on the glass and get a lot of putbacks. And with, like you said, the way they're going to guard TKR, I think there's some chance for some big to big stuff where they catch him slipping on the baseline, cutting to the rim where TKR can hit him there as well. But this is probably feels more like a Smith TKR game for those of you guys who like to look at player point props. To me, this feels more like a Smith TKR game than like everybody else, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a very good chance that Smith and TKR just kind of get cooking and go from there. Yeah, it feels like a lot of TKR to me.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, defensively, how does Purdue try to slow down Ohio State in terms of what they want to do, or what is Purdue going to have to do well with the fact that they will go kind of ISO or pick and roll so heavily?
Yeah, one, you're at some point you got to just kind of play good man-to-man defense and just try to stay in front of your guy. Like obviously, like that you could be like, duh, that's every game, but especially for this game with how Ohio State plays. But then beyond that, right, have good screen navigation, but the rotations have to be good. They were really good against Oregon, where they're going to play drop unless it's like first two, or they might hedge a little bit. But if they do, the rotation's got to be good. You have to tag the bigs, especially if it's Royal, Stewart, and Bradshaw. I don't think they've had the years Ohio State wanted, but they are still two athletic centers that can go finish at the rim. So just making sure the rotations are good, because this is a team, right, that once at times a lot of these players can get a little bit of tunnel vision, and they haven't been insane turning over the ball, but actually no. If in conference play, Ohio State is 16th in offensive turnover percentage out of 18. They have been turning the ball over more. This is a team I think you can speed up a bit. The offense hasn't been good, and just with a lot of ISO. So staying in front, force contested shots, put some pressure, get some turnovers, kind of do what Purdue's identity has become for the last 7 games somehow defensively, and continue with that, I guess.
Yeah, and just kind of looking at turnover percentages and who turns the ball over on this team. I don't think it's a matter of like you're going to heat up Bruce Thornton and force him into a whole bunch of turnovers, but everybody else on this team, there is opportunity there, especially their wings and bigs. I should say more really of their front court from a turnover percentage standpoint. So it'll be interesting to see how much Caleb can harass those guys and maybe force some things. And then if they do have to kick it out, Braden kind of floating in those passing lanes like he's been doing. Somebody during the show yesterday, somebody said that Braden Smith in Big Ten play is leading the conference now in steals per game.
That's probably right. He's 67th in steal percentage in the country, and he plays so many minutes.
Right. Yeah. So it's been interesting to see the identity of this team change some, like we talked about yesterday, right? I think a lot of people were still questioning whether this transformation was real or not, but it sure appears to be that way from what it looked like in the Oregon game. We've got some other huge Big Ten matchups coming up quickly. There's a really good chance by the time this day ends that Purdue is sitting on top, tied with a couple of other. Would it just be Michigan State that would be tied with? if
And
Michigan State loses today?
Michigan.
And Michigan?
Yeah.
Okay, and Michigan. And then we get a matchup against Michigan coming up not too far from now. So Purdue positioned to do some good things in terms of where they sit right now in the Big Ten standings. I know Joe is dying for this game to start at noon. Do you have any other big things to put out there about this game specifically before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, just like I'm going to come back to where I started of just like this cannot be a game you overlook. Purdue is the better team. That is undoubted. Purdue is the better team. Purdue is in Mackey Arena. This is an Ohio State team that hasn't been able to win close games. But at the same time, got to come out, just kind of play for 40 minutes hard. And then if that happens, they should get a win would be my guess. But cannot overlook this game.
100%. And obviously with Michigan and IU coming up on that schedule too, there's always a chance that could be the case. But I just don't feel like with the leadership that Purdue has on this team in terms of the upperclassmen that are starting, I don't see that happening. I quite frankly, I don't want to call this a potential to be a Purdue-Nebraska blowout, but this feels to me like a game that Purdue could win by 15 to 20.
If I was to guess, I think it's one of those that's like between 8 and 15 the whole way, where you're never like, oh yeah, this game's over, but it's never like, oh, Purdue might lose this. Just like Purdue kind of in control for 40 minutes, keeping Ohio State at bay. Ohio State maybe makes one run in the second half, Purdue counters, and they hopefully should walk away with a W. So,
yeah.
You got anything else?
I guess my two big keys in this game would be offensive rebounding and aggression to get onto the foul line, because I think those are the two areas that you can really exploit them. Outside of that, I've got nothing, Joe.
Yeah, no, I think those are very fair. Knock down some threes would be good too, just to see the ball go in once again. Is what they were like 5% on the West Coast. It felt like from three, but I'm sure they'll bounce back in Mackey. So that'll be Tuesday. It is a 7:30 p.m. Eastern time tip on Peacock. What's up?
I do have one thing. Did you see at the beginning of the broadcast of that last game, the sideline reporter, she was like, I talked to Braden Smith before the game and like, is he getting up big for this matchup? Yada, yada. And she was like, Braden said he doesn't really pay attention to that, and he comes into every game equally the same. I have never believed anything less in my life because you just see some of the stuff that he's done on social media or whatever. And like, he's paying attention and he's got some chips on his shoulder. But I don't know if you heard that or saw that. I meant to bring it up in the post-game show yesterday, but I have never believed something less in my entire life. So anyway, I do think he'll be hyped and pumped up just because Thornton's name gets tossed around a lot in Big Ten circles as being one of the better point guards in this conference. So I think he's going to be dialed in.
Yeah, no, that I am with you. That is just a lie from Braden Smith, but it just is. So yeah, that's good. So Purdue takes on Ohio State 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, Peacock. We will be live shortly after the final buzzer, probably around 10-ish p.m. Eastern time. So subscribe. If you turn on bell notifications, you'll get notified as soon as we do go live. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will see you all then.